Hi, this is Alex Kudryavtsev from Cornell University. Human-environment interactions are influenced by many factors, including critical thinking. Environmental education and STEM disciplines in general can foster critical thinking so that individuals in society can address more effectively such issues as global climate change, using more renewable energy, saving water and other natural resources, using sustainable sources of food. To discuss critical thinking and how it relates to environmental education programs, today we'll talk to Dr. Nirav Patel, a research scholar at Rutgers University. Hi, Nirav.
Hello, Alex.
Can you tell us what is critical thinking in general and how do you define it?
Critical thinking needs to be couched in the umbrella of a skill set of learning. So when we discuss critical thinking, specifically in terms of climate change or environment, it is not a standalone phenomena. Climate change is an interrelationship between natural physical sciences and social sciences and human behavior and its actions. Thus, critical thinking, especially when it comes to STEM and environmental education, needs to be couched in the umbrella of interdisciplinary learning and teaching in a way that infuses a more critical approach to understanding what our problems are, what are the systems boundaries under which these problems exist, and what are the most possible solutions that can be achieved within those system boundaries.
And, I also wonder, do you think that environmental education will achieve its goals if we only focus on the transfer of knowledge and not much reflection about the issues?
I will give you a complicated answer because in my work, what I've done is measure what I call indirect environmental significant behavior. In my work, the education was geared towards K-12 classrooms in which grades 8 through 12. Students were educated on climate change, renewable energy, and environment. The idea being, if we educate these students, then they will more likely change their behavior towards these issues. But what it turns out is their capacity to affect change is limited because you cannot expect a 12-year-old to go start buying a Prius. Thereby, we need to influence them in a more indirect manner. And it turns out that effective thinking, which is thinking about their emotions or emotional attachment to the environment, is perhaps a more powerful way to affect behavior. But when it comes to adults, such as the teachers, to influence them to start teaching such material in their classroom, a more direct approach is also to talk about their energy attitudes and discuss that in the training programs and stay away from the environment. Because with the teachers, it's the opposite. With an adult, the emotions are so strong towards the environment, either for or against, that it gets in the way of critical thinking.
And do you think that critical thinking can be trained, or is this like a psychological trait that is set in a person or defined by the families? I mean, like, what hope do environmental educators have in fostering critical thinking, and maybe how much time does it take? Maybe you have some ideas from your own experience or from the literature that you're familiar with.
I think we have always concentrated on, in education, when it comes to teaching or learning, we always taught that teaching content, meaning if I only told you over and over again that carbon dioxide emissions are increasing, then you would change your behavior and your attitude towards the idea that humans are causing climate change. But that is not working out that well. And that's because we've been focusing on lower order skill sets, and we need to focus on higher order skill sets. So when you go back into taxonomy of learning, Bloom's taxonomy, we think of critical thinking, giving higher order critical thinking skills to our students and also our teachers to teach our students. But my work shows that that perhaps is not sufficient, and we need to focus on what I call the non-cognitive skill sets, which essentially involves things such as locus of control, which is a psychological artifact, connectedness in the team, being a team player, self-confidence. Grit is what Angela Duckworth at UPenn calls it. The person who's published the most on this, James Heckman at University of Chicago, calls it the soft skills. And in academic literature, we essentially refer all of these collectively as non-cognitive skills. So the idea is to focus more on non-cognitive elements as opposed to the cognitive elements, which is where critical thinking belongs, And that perhaps is the answer to cause students or the teachers to start thinking in a more critical manner on issues such as climate change.
When you speak on climate change, it just reminds me how polarized our society is, including learners and educators, politicians, just general public, whether it exists or not. I don't know, maybe you have an opinion whether critical thinking can bring those people who don't believe in climate change to really change their opinion. And I guess it's very hard. And I just wonder whether critical thinking can help us.
My answer would be yes and no. So critical thinking absolutely is important, given that we're looking at complicated problems and there exists a nexus of problems that are connected. And so critical thinking offers a process-based tool in which we can explain to a student what are the ways a certain issue is connected with multiple different dimensions of his or her life. However, when you ask about behavioral change or attitudinal change or individual change towards the issue of climate change. So if I were somebody coming from a family or an environment or a sociological environment where climate change is considered to be geological and it has always existed and humans have not caused it, then perhaps no amount of critical thinking will help me. So the faculties that will most appeal to such individuals will most likely not be critical thinking, but experiential learning, in which that student perhaps can interact with other students and find out that perhaps there are other answers that I have not considered. It is only then that critical thinking can step in and help that individual to start focusing on what is essentially an analysis of the situation. But prior to that bias being removed, I would argue that no amount of critical thinking would help that individual.
So, Nirav, I think that a lot of educators who listen to this podcast, and especially if they're interested to foster critical thinking, they might be interested to measure it. Maybe you have some ideas, or maybe you can point us to some resources, or maybe you observed other people who measured that.
Critical thinking has been measured primarily in higher learning through tests that measure cognitive skill sets. So again, going back to the difference between cognitive and non-cognitive, we primarily measure critical thinking using cognitive skills. So here the assessments are usually done under K-12 to K-16, in which they measure content-based questions to analyze what is your skill set when it comes to global thinking or problem solving or analytical thinking and reasoning. And there are multiple tests that are available. I would argue there are so many that perhaps that is a problem because we're measuring content-based information and we're not really measuring skill-based information, meaning I could easily analyze something for you, Alex, today and come out on the top of the test as being a very good critical thinker, but that perhaps is removed from my disacceptance of climate change and my disacceptance of having any association that humans have caused climate change, and thereby my pro-environmental behavior or actions towards climate change will be negligible to none. So we've done very little in that instance. But to answer your question, there are numerous tests depending on what you want to do, especially in STEM-based curriculum. We use students' reasoning abilities. We give them critical thinking assignments. We essentially review their critical thinking and writing. Fair-minded test. We analyze their analytical reasoning and association. There are numerous tests that can be utilized, and all of which are fantastic in measuring their cognitive skill set, but they do not measure the non-cognitive skill set, which it appears, at least from my work and other work from people I've mentioned before, that shows that is far more powerful in causing change, and it's causing a change that is for the lifetime. It's not a short-term fix, it's a long-term fix, which is what perhaps we're seeking.
So, Nirav, I hear from you that we should think critically about critical thinking as an outcome of environmental education, maybe combine it with other factors. Is this what you wanted to say?
Yes, exactly. So I'm not arguing that critical thinking does not work or is irrelevant or is not essential. I'm simply suggesting that we need to focus more on creating opportunities, for example, creating opportunities for experiential learning that will perhaps take care of the non-cognitive skill sets and allow norms to change or transfer over between individuals such that when we use critical thinking, it can be used far more effectively across a broader audience. So I'm not suggesting by any means that critical thinking is irrelevant. I'm simply suggesting that focusing only on critical thinking perhaps would be a mistake.
Thank you very much, Nirav. This was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.